The observation gallery of Pinnacle Prime stretched 300 meters along the outer rim of the diplomatic station, its transparent aluminum walls offering an unobstructed view of the nebula that had served as neutral territory for 3,000 years. Commander Charlotte Webb stood with her hands clasped behind her back, watching ships from 47 different civilizations drift in carefully choreographed patterns around the station. Each vessel represented a species that had mastered faster-than-light travel, conquered the challenges of their homeworlds, and earned a seat at the galactic concordance. Humanity had achieved FTL exactly 50 years ago. In galactic terms, that made them infants. Commander Webb. The voice came from behind her, melodic and layered with harmonics that human vocal cords couldn't reproduce. You arrive early, as always. Charlotte turned to find Curator Silmith gliding toward her, the Talvine's crystalline exoskeleton catching the nebula's light in prismatic cascades. The scientific species had been among the first to welcome humanity to the concordance, sharing research and asking for nothing in return except curiosity satisfied. Old habits, Charlotte said, offering a slight smile. My instructors at the Naval Academy believed that being on time meant you were already late. A philosophy the Vacrosians would appreciate, though they would express it with less courtesy. Silmith's vocal membranes rippled in what Charlotte had learned to recognize as concern. I must ask, has Earth received any communications regarding today's session? Charlotte's smile faded. Nothing official. Should we have? Silmith moved closer, dropping her voice despite the empty gallery. There are rumors, Commander. Whispers in the preparatory chambers. The Vacrosian delegation has requested priority agenda placement for a territorial matter. They arrived yesterday with twice their usual security complement. The words settled in Charlotte's stomach like cold iron. The Vacrosian Empire controlled 200 star systems through a combination of military superiority and aggressive expansion. They had been eyeing the human colonies in the outer reaches for months, making pointed comments in council sessions about inefficient resource utilization by juvenile species. I see, Charlotte said, her voice carefully neutral. Thank you for the warning, Curator. The Talvine remember what it was like to be young in the galaxy, Silmith said softly. We remember species who viewed our scientific curiosity as weakness, who suggested we required guidance from our betters. The concordance eventually recognized our value, but it took time. And advocates. She paused. Humanity may need advocates today. Before Charlotte could respond, the gallery's entrance chimed. A delegation of Vacrosians entered, their reptilian frames heavy with ceremonial armor that did nothing to disguise the predatory grace of their movements. At their center walked Ambassador Krell, Supreme Military Governor of the Vacrosian Empire's Third Frontier Command. He was massive even by his species' standards, his scaled hide bearing the ritual scarring of a career warrior. His eyes, vertical slits of amber, swept the gallery with calculated disdain before settling on Charlotte. His lipless mouth curved into something that might have been a smile on a creature capable of such expressions. The human observer, Krell said, his voice a deep rumble that carried effortlessly across the space. How fortunate. I had hoped to see you before the session begins. Charlotte met his gaze without flinching. Ambassador Krell, I wasn't aware the Vacrosian delegation sought pre-session consultations with observer species. Consultation? Krell moved closer, his retinue fanning out behind him like the wings of some gray predatory bird. No, Commander. Consider this a courtesy. Professional wisdom shared between those who understand the realities of galactic security. He gestured toward the ships visible beyond the gallery walls. You were military before you became a diplomat, yes? Surely you understand that some species are better equipped than others to manage the complexities of territorial administration. I understand that the Concordance recognizes the sovereign rights of all member species, Charlotte said evenly, regardless of how long they've been part of the galactic community. Sovereign rights. Krelvas's laugh was like rocks grinding together. A pleasant fiction, suitable for council chambers and diplomatic receptions. But you and I both know that rights are meaningless without the strength to defend them. He leaned closer, and Charlotte caught the sharp scent of whatever the Vacrosians used as combat stimulants. Tell me, Commander, how many ships does humanity deploy to defend its 12 colonies? Charlotte's expression didn't change. Enough. Enough, Krelvas repeated, savoring the word. We shall discuss what constitutes enough in today's session. Do try to keep your emotional responses in check. The Council appreciates professional discourse. He swept past her toward the chamber entrance, his retinue following in perfect formation. Silmith moved to Charlotte's side, her crystalline structure dimming slightly with distress. I fear the rumors were optimistic, the Talveen said quietly. That was not the demeanor of a species seeking negotiation. Charlotte watched the Vacrosians disappear into the council chambers. Her hands remained clasped behind her back, but her fingers had gone white with pressure. No, she agreed. It wasn't. The Concordance Chamber was a masterwork of diplomatic architecture, designed to accommodate the wildly different physiologies of its member species while maintaining an atmosphere of equality. Crystalline seats arranged in concentric circles allowed each delegation clear sightlines to the central platform. Above, holographic projectors could display information in formats compatible with every known sensory system. Charlotte took her position in the observation tier, the section reserved for species without voting rights. 3 other civilizations occupied similar positions, 2 who had achieved FTL within the last century, and 1 whose homeworld had been rendered uninhabitable, leaving them with insufficient population to maintain their former territorial holdings. Being grouped with them was meant to be temporary, a transitional status while humanity proved its stability and capability. 5 years of flawless diplomatic conduct hadn't been enough to change that status. Charlotte was beginning to understand it never would be, not through patience and protocol. Council Speaker Mordain called the session to order, his 4 arms performing the traditional gestures of welcome and convocation. The Mordelian species had held the speaker position for 6 centuries, priding themselves on impartiality and procedural precision. The Concordance recognizes Ambassador Krelvas, who has requested priority consideration for territorial resolution 4479. Krelvas rose from his delegation's position in the inner circle, moving to the central platform with deliberate ceremony. Behind him, holographic displays materialized, showing star charts of the outer reaches. Human colonies glowed in blue. Vacrosian systems formed a red crescent that curved around them like a closing fist. Honored members of the Concordance, Krelvas began, his voice carrying the formal cadences of official proceedings. I come before you today to address a growing crisis in resource management and territorial security. The region, designated as the Outer Reaches, contains 17 star systems of significant strategic value. 12 of these systems have been claimed by humanity, a species that achieved faster-than-light capability a mere 50 standard years ago. The holographic display zoomed in, highlighting the human colonies. Charlotte recognized each one. Proxima Threshold, New Bangalore, Terra Nova, Kyoto Station, and 8 others, homes to 3 million human civilians who had taken the long journey from Earth seeking new opportunities among the stars. The Vacrosian Empire does not question humanity's right to exist in the galactic community, Krelvos continued, and Charlotte felt her jaw tighten at the careful phrasing. However, we must acknowledge certain realities regarding developmental maturity and administrative capability. These 12 colonies represent significant resource extraction operations, trade route control points, and defensive positions. The question before this council is simple. Should such strategic assets remain in the hands of a juvenile species with limited defensive capabilities and minimal administrative experience? Murmurs rippled through the chamber. Charlotte noticed several delegations nodding, their equivalent of agreement. Others remained still, watching carefully. The Vacrosian Empire proposes Territorial Resolution 4479. The display shifted, showing 9 of the 12 human colonies now highlighted in Vacrosian red. We offer to assume administrative control of 9 colonial holdings, providing proper development infrastructure, security guarantees, and resource management oversight. This action would serve the greater good of galactic stability, while allowing humanity to maintain 3 colonies appropriate to their current developmental stage. Charlotte's hands gripped the arms of her seat. 3 colonies out of 12. And the phrasing, assume administrative control rather than annex. It was conquest dressed in diplomatic language. Humanity would, of course, be compensated for infrastructure already in place, Krelvos added. The Vacrosian Empire is not unreasonable. We simply recognize that some species lack the capacity to properly defend and develop the territories they claim. Better to acknowledge this reality now than to witness the inevitable failures that will come from overextension. Council Speaker Mordain gestured toward Charlotte. The Concordance recognizes that humanity is directly affected by this proposal. Commander Webb, you may address the Council, though we remind you that observer species do not possess voting rights on territorial matters. Charlotte stood, moving to the secondary platform reserved for non-voting members. Every eye in the chamber, compound, crystalline, energy-based, and otherwise, focused on her. She felt the weight of their judgment, their calculations about whether humanity deserved the territories it claimed. "Thank you, Council Speaker," she said, her voice carrying the measured calm of naval briefing rooms. "I have several questions regarding Resolution 4479. First, Ambassador Krelvos mentions defensive capabilities. Has the Vacrosian Empire detected any security failures in human-controlled space? Any instances where our colonies failed to maintain stability or protect civilian populations?" Krelvos's amber eyes narrowed slightly. The absence of failure does not indicate capability. It merely suggests that you have not yet been tested. "I see," Charlotte nodded slowly. Second question. The resolution proposes Vacrosian administration of 9 specific colonies. What criteria determined which colonies would be administered, and which 3 humanity would be permitted to retain? "Strategic value and resource density," Krelvos said flatly. "The colonies we propose to manage are those most critical to regional security. The 3 we leave to humanity are marginal holdings, suitable for a species of your developmental level." "How generous." Charlotte's voice remained professionally neutral, but something in her tone made several delegates shift uncomfortably. Third question. You mentioned that humanity should acknowledge its limitations before inevitable failures occur. Could you specify what failures you anticipate, or what evidence suggests such failures are forthcoming? Krelvos's scales rippled, a gesture Charlotte had learned indicated irritation. "Commander, I understand that your species lacks experience with galactic realities. But surely even you can grasp that 3 million civilians across 12 colonies represents a defensive impossibility for a species with your limited fleet capacity. The outer reaches border multiple territorial zones. Without adequate military presence, 3 human colony ships disappeared near Vacrosian space 6 months ago, Charlotte interrupted quietly. 1,200 civilian passengers and crew. Their last transmissions indicated no mechanical failures, no navigational errors. They simply ceased broadcasting. Has the Vacrosian Empire's extensive military presence in that region produced any evidence regarding their fate? The chamber went silent. Krelvas's expression hardened into something reptilian and cold. Are you accusing the Vacrosian Empire of aggression against human vessels? I'm asking if your military forces found any evidence of what happened to our people, Charlotte said. Given that you control that region so thoroughly that you propose expanding into the remaining human territories, surely your sensor networks detected something. Debris, distress signals, any indication of what became of 1,200 human lives. The disappearance of vessels in uncontrolled space is a tragic reality of spacefaring civilization, Krelvas said. The Vacrosian Empire has no information regarding your lost ships. Perhaps if humanity maintained adequate defensive patrols, such losses could be prevented. Perhaps, Charlotte agreed softly. Or perhaps species with adequate defensive capabilities eliminated them to demonstrate why humanity should surrender its territories. The chamber erupted in shocked murmurs. Council Speaker Mordain raised 2 arms for silence. Commander Webb, this council does not traffic in unsubstantiated accusations. I make no accusations, Charlotte said. I simply note that the ambassador's resolution conveniently ignores the fact that human colonies have maintained perfect safety records until they began bordering Vacrosian space. Now, ships disappear, and we're told we lack the capability to defend ourselves. A fascinating correlation. Krelvas moved toward her platform, his massive frame radiating controlled fury. You forget yourself, human. The Vacrosian Empire has maintained regional stability for 8 centuries. We do not make war on children, but we also do not permit children to play with weapons they cannot control. He turned to address the full council. Resolution gives humanity 30 standard days to accept Vacrosian administration of the designated colonies. This is not negotiable. If humanity refuses, the Vacrosian Empire will be forced to take necessary action to ensure regional security. The choice is yours, Commander Webb. Peaceful transition or inevitable conflict when your inadequate forces fail to protect what you cannot hold. He returned to his delegation's position, scales gleaming under the chamber lights. Charlotte stood alone on the secondary platform, aware that 47 civilizations were weighing Vacrosian military might against human diplomatic protests. The mathematics weren't complicated. The Vacrosian Empire commanded fleets that had crushed rebellions and enforced territorial claims for centuries. Humanity had 12 colonies, and whatever ships they'd managed to build in 50 years. Council Speaker Mordain looked at her with something that might have been sympathy. Does humanity wish to formally respond to resolution at this time? Charlotte met Krelvas's amber stare across the chamber. She thought of 1,200 civilians whose ships had vanished. She thought of 3 million colonists who had left Earth seeking new lives, now being told they would become subjects of an empire that viewed them as property to be managed. She thought of Admiral Reeves in the Unified Defense Council, who had been planning for exactly this scenario since before humanity left its home system. Yes, she said quietly. Humanity will respond. But not today. Ambassador Krelvas has given us 30 days. We'll use them. She walked from the platform, maintaining perfect composure until she reached the observation tier. Behind her, The council moved on to other matters, already treating the Vacrosian resolution as an inevitability. Silmuth caught her eye, the Talvian's crystalline structure dimming with distress that transcended species. Charlotte activated her quantum communicator, the encoded signal impossible to intercept. "Priority transmission to Fleet Admiral Reeves," she said softly. "They've made their move. They want 9 of 12 colonies and gave us 30 days to surrender them. 3 colony ships, 1,200 people. I'm certain now. The Vacrosians destroyed them." The response came 6 minutes later, delayed only by the distance to Earth. Admiral Jonathan Reeves's voice was calm, carrying the weight of decades in service. "Understood, Commander. Stand by for instructions. And Charlotte? Tell them we received the message. Tell them we'll respond before the deadline. Tell them Earth always responds." Charlotte looked through the transparent walls at the ships drifting in their ancient patterns, civilizations that had forgotten what it meant to fight for survival, because the galaxy had been peaceful for so long. They had mistaken humanity's patience for weakness, its diplomatic restraint for inability. They were about to learn the difference. 28 days. Charlotte had spent them preparing for this moment, coordinating with Earth, watching Vacrosian fleet movements through intelligence channels that the Talveen quietly provided. 28 days of species watching humanity, wondering if the young civilization would bend or break. She requested the formal council session on day 28, 2 days before Krell-Voss's deadline. The Vacrosian delegation arrived with visible satisfaction, their ceremonial armor polished to gleaming perfection. Krell-Voss took his position in the inner circle with the bearing of someone attending a coronation. His coronation, celebrating the expansion of Vacrosian territory through the sheer weight of inevitability. The observation galleries were packed. Word had spread through Pinnacle Prime that humanity would deliver its response today. Dozens of species sent additional representatives, curious to witness how a juvenile civilization accepted its subordination to galactic realities. Charlotte stood on the secondary platform, her dress uniform crisp and perfect, her expression calm. She held a small holographic projector, its weight insignificant in her palm, its contents carefully crafted over weeks of consultation with Earth's Unified Defense Council. Council Speaker Mordain called the session to order. "Commander Webb has requested time to deliver humanity's formal response to Territorial Resolution 4479. The Council recognizes Earth's representative." Charlotte activated the projector. A hologram materialized above the central platform, large enough for every delegation to see clearly. The image resolved into a man in the dark blue uniform of Earth's Unified Defense Forces, his shoulders bearing the 5 stars of Fleet Admiral. His face was weathered, lined with decades of service, his gray hair cut to military precision. His eyes were steady and calm. Fleet Admiral Jonathan Reeves, the man who had built humanity's deep space navy from nothing, who had commanded Earth's first defensive fleet, who had spent 50 years preparing for the possibility that humanity's welcome to the galaxy might come with teeth attached. The chamber fell silent. Even Krell-Voss leaned forward slightly, curious despite his certainty of human capitulation. Reeves's hologram looked directly at the Vacrosian delegation, as if he could see them across the light years between Earth and Pinnacle Prime. When he spoke, his voice carried the weight of absolute conviction. "Come try." The message ended. 2 words. The hologram dissolved, leaving Charlotte alone on the platform with 47 civilizations staring at her in various states of shock, confusion, and, from the Vacrosian delegation, dawning fury. Charlotte met Krell-Voss's amber glare without flinching. Let me clarify Earth's position so there is no diplomatic ambiguity. The Unified Defense Council rejects territorial resolution in its entirety. Any Vacrosian vessel entering human-controlled space will be considered hostile. Any attack on human colonies or ships will be met with total military response. Humanity will accept nothing less than formal apology and full reparations for the 1,200 civilians murdered when your empire destroyed 3 colony ships 6 months ago. The chamber erupted. Delegates from 24 species shouted in overlapping languages, their translation matrices struggling to keep pace. Council Speaker Mordain raised all 4 arms, calling for order that took nearly a minute to restore. Krelvas rose from his position, scales rippling with barely contained rage. Then, unexpectedly, he began to laugh. The sound was harsh and grating, like metal scraping against stone, and it cut through the chamber's chaos like a blade. Apology, he repeated, savoring the word as his laughter faded. Reparations. Total military response. He turned to address the full council, his voice dripping with contempt. The human child makes demands. 12 primitive colonies, barely 50 years removed from their homeworld, believe they can challenge an empire of 200 systems. An empire whose fleets have maintained order for 8 centuries. He moved toward Charlotte's platform, and she felt the pressure of his presence like a physical force. Commander Webb, I had hoped your species would show wisdom. Instead, you demonstrate the foolish arrogance of youth. Very well. Let me educate you regarding the consequences of refusing guidance from your betters. Charlotte remained perfectly still. The consequences are yours to discover, Ambassador, not ours. Bold words. Krelvas turned back to the council. My 3rd fleet has already been deployed to facilitate the territorial transition. 127 warships, a force sufficient to subjugate 12 human colonies without strain. They are currently 3 days from Proxima Threshold, your outermost holding. He looked at Charlotte. When your colonists watch Vacrosian dreadnoughts arrive in overwhelming numbers, perhaps they will have more sense than their diplomatic representative. Perhaps they will choose survival over pride. Curator Silmeth's crystalline structure had gone pale, her bioluminescence dimmed with distress. Charlotte caught her gaze across the chamber and saw genuine fear there, not for humanity's defeat, but for what might come next. The Vacrosian Empire gives humanity one final opportunity, Krelvas continued. When my fleet arrives at Proxima Threshold, your colonial governor may accept peaceful transition. Or your colonists may choose to resist and learn why juvenile species do not challenge their betters. The choice, Commander Webb, is yours. He returned to his delegation's position, radiating satisfaction. Around the chamber, Charlotte saw delegates nodding, already mourning humanity's foolish pride. Only a few species, the Talveen, the Mordelians, perhaps 3 others, watched with something other than certainty of human defeat. Charlotte straightened her uniform, her voice carrying clearly across the silent chamber. Then, we understand each other perfectly, Ambassador. Your fleet will find its answer at Proxima Threshold. I suspect it won't be the one you expect. She walked from the platform, ignoring the whispers that followed her. Silmeth caught her in the corridor outside the chamber, the Talveen moving with unusual urgency. Commander, please, reconsider. Krelvas is not bluffing. 127 warships. I know exactly what's coming, Charlotte said quietly. So does Admiral Reeves. So does every human ship captain in the outer reaches. We've had 50 years to prepare for this, Curator. 50 years of knowing we might be alone out here. 50 years of planning for the possibility that the galaxy's peace was built on the strong dominating the weak. You cannot win, Silmith said desperately. Your sensor readings from our intelligence network. You've seen the Vacrosian vessels, dreadnoughts massing over 2 kilometers, battle carriers capable of deploying hundreds of strike craft. Your patrol ships will do what they were designed to do, Charlotte finished. She placed a hand on Silmith's crystalline arm, feeling the thrumming energy beneath the surface. Thank you, Curator, for the warnings, for the intelligence, for caring what happens to a juvenile species you barely know. But this was always coming. Better to face it now, on our terms, than to wait until we're truly helpless. She left Silmith in the corridor and returned to her quarters. The quantum communicator activated automatically, Reeves's face appearing immediately. I watched, he said. Well delivered, Commander. How did they take it? Exactly as expected. Krelvos has his 3rd fleet 3 days from Proxima threshold, 127 ships. He's certain we'll fold when we see them. Reeves's expression didn't change, but Charlotte had served with him long enough to recognize the cold calculation behind his steady gaze. Captain Rodriguez has 8 ships in the Proxima system. Against 127, that should look like suicide. It should, Charlotte agreed. Is everything in position? Has been for 43 years since we first detected the Vacrosians expanding toward our projected colonial range. Proxima got the full treatment. Reeves paused. Charlotte, once this starts, there's no diplomatic solution, no negotiation. The galaxy will judge us by what happens in the next 72 hours. Then we'd better make sure they judge us correctly, Charlotte said. Give them hell, Admiral. That's the plan, Reeves said, and the transmission ended. Fleet Commander Vakthos commanded the 3rd Fleet from the dreadnought Dominant Claw, a vessel that had crushed rebellions across 3 sectors and bore the battle honors of a dozen successful campaigns. His career had been built on the certainty that superior numbers and superior firepower made victory inevitable. The reports from forward scouts only confirmed that certainty. 8 human ships detected in Proxima threshold, his sensor officer reported. Corvette-class patrol vessels, mass approximately 12,000 tons each, positioned in defensive orbit around the primary colony habitats. Vakthos's scales rippled with satisfaction. 8 ships against 127 Vacrosian warships ranging from cruisers to dreadnoughts, supported by carrier groups and heavy missile platforms. The humans had chosen to resist, and in doing so, had chosen their annihilation. Battle formation, he ordered. All ships' weapons hot. Broadcast on human frequencies. Offer one final chance for surrender. If they refuse, eliminate their vessels with minimal collateral damage to the colony infrastructure. The Supreme Governor wants these facilities intact for Vacrosian use. The 3rd Fleet emerged from FTL at the system's edge in perfect formation, a wall of armored ships bristling with weapons that had shattered defenses across 200 worlds. The 8 human vessels maintained their position around the orbital habitats, small and fragile against the overwhelming might bearing down on them. Vakthos opened the communications channel himself. Human vessels. This is Fleet Commander Vakthos of the Vacrosian 3rd Fleet. You are outmatched and outgunned. Stand down immediately and allow Vacrosian forces to assume control of this system. Resist, and you will be destroyed. You have 2 minutes to comply. The response came 40 seconds later. A human face appeared on the display, male, middle-aged, with the calm expression of someone who had made peace with their decisions long ago. This is Captain Rodriguez of the UDS Defiant. Fleet Commander, your vessels are in violation of human territorial space. You have one opportunity to withdraw immediately. Otherwise, we will defend our people. You have 30 seconds. Laughter rippled through Dominant Claw's command deck. Vaktos felt his scales flush with dark amusement. Captain Rodriguez, your bravado is noted, but mathematics doesn't lie. 8 ships against 127. Stand down, or I will have no choice but to— 20 seconds. Rodriguez interrupted quietly. Vaktos cut the transmission. All ships, weapons free. Target the human vessels. I want clean kills. No stray fire hitting the habitats. Fire on my mark. The 30 seconds elapsed. The human ships didn't move. Mark. The Third Fleet opened fire. Missiles by the hundreds streaked across the void. Energy weapons capable of cutting through capital ship armor locked onto the 8 small human vessels. It should have been a slaughter that lasted seconds. Then, the human ships moved. Not evasively, but with coordinated precision that shouldn't have been possible without Ansible communication systems, which the intelligence reports insisted humans didn't possess. They dispersed in 8 different vectors simultaneously, and Vaktos' sensors screamed warnings that made no sense. Weapon signatures spiking, his tactical officer shouted. Energy readings are— Commander, that's not possible for ships that size. The 8 human vessels opened fire. Not with the small point defense systems expected from patrol craft, but with weapons that made Vaktos' dreadnought shake with proximity alarms. Kinetic accelerators firing projectiles at relativistic speeds, velocities that required power plants far larger than those small ships should possess. Directed energy weapons that punched through the Dominant Claw's shields and scarred its hull in the first salvo. And then, the colony habitats moved. Vaktos watched in shock as the orbital structures that his scans had identified as civilian facilities suddenly blazed with power signatures. Camouflage fields deactivated, revealing defensive platforms the size of Vakrosian cruisers, their surfaces studded with weapon emplacements that could have defended major military installations. They had been there all along, disguised, waiting. The platforms opened fire with coordinated precision that suggested a single controlling intelligence. Missiles that maneuvered with impossible agility, adjusting mid-flight to compensate for evasion. Particle beams that sliced through shields like they weren't there. And something new. Railgun rounds that arrived ahead of their visual signatures, moving at speeds that gave defending ships no time to react. Evasive maneuvers, Vaktos roared. All ships break formation. Too late. The first Vakrosian cruiser exploded, its fusion core breaching as kinetic rounds punched through its reactor shielding. Then, a second. Then, 3 more in rapid succession as the human ships executed maneuvers that violated everything Vaktos understood about FTL limitations. They were micro-jumping, making tiny faster-than-light hops that should have required minutes of calculation but seemed to happen instantaneously. One moment, a human vessel was 3,000 kilometers away. The next, it appeared directly behind a Vakrosian destroyer and unloaded its full payload at point-blank range. The battle devolved into chaos. The Third Fleet's numerical superiority meant nothing when human ships could appear anywhere, strike with devastating precision, and vanish before return fire could track them. The defensive platforms coordinated with the mobile vessels in patterns that suggested quantum-level communication, each element knowing exactly where the others would be and when. 47 minutes after the engagement began, Vaktos ordered the retreat. 23 Vakrosian ships were gone, vaporized or broken into debris. 31 more had sustained damage ranging from minor to catastrophic. The Dominant Claw had lost 3 of its 4 shield generators and was venting atmosphere from 17 hull breaches. The human ships didn't pursue. They returned to their positions around the colony, which Vaktos now understood was one of the most heavily defended installations he'd ever encountered. Not a single human vessel had been destroyed. His sensors detected no significant damage to any of them. Vakthos transmitted the engagement data directly to Krelvas on Vakros Prime, knowing his career was over but needing the Supreme Governor to understand what they faced. The humans hadn't won through luck. They'd won through superior technology, superior tactics, and a level of preparation that suggested they'd been expecting this exact scenario. As the Third Fleet limped toward friendly space, Vakthos watched the sensor feeds and understood with absolute certainty. Humanity had been underestimated. The council chambers erupted when the battle reports arrived. Charlotte stood on the secondary platform, watching delegates process the impossible. 23 Vakrosian ships destroyed, 31 damaged, no human losses. The numerical reality contradicted everything the galaxy thought it knew about humanity's technological level. Krelvas stood before his delegation, scales flushed dark with fury. Treachery. The humans disguised military installations as civilian habitats. They employed weapons in violation of conventional warfare doctrine. They defended their territory, Charlotte interrupted, her voice cutting through his tirade. Against an invasion force that entered human space with hostile intent. A force that you deployed, Ambassador, before humanity had even responded to your ultimatum. I believe that's what we call bad faith negotiation. You hid military assets, Krelvas roared. You deceived the Council regarding your defensive capabilities. We stationed appropriate defensive forces in our territory, Charlotte said calmly. We were never obligated to provide detailed inventories of our military assets to species we didn't trust. And given that 3 of our colony ships disappeared near your space 6 months ago, I'd say our lack of trust was well-founded. Council Speaker Mordain looked between them, all 4 arms raised in a gesture of judicial consideration. The Council must review the engagement data. If humanity employed deception regarding its technological capabilities, then we did exactly what any species would do when facing a hostile neighbor, Charlotte finished. We prepared. We planned. We built defenses appropriate to protect our people. And when an invasion fleet crossed into our territory with explicit hostile intent, we responded proportionally. Curator Silmith spoke from her delegation's position, her voice carrying clearly. The Council should note that the Vakrosian Third Fleet fired first. The engagement data shows human vessels offered withdrawal opportunity before engaging. This was not aggression. This was defense. Charlotte caught Silmith's gaze and nodded subtle thanks. Other species were murmuring now, reviewing their own copies of the engagement data. The Talvine's analysis was correct. The humans had given warning, had offered retreat, had fired only when fired upon. But the technological implications were what had the Council unsettled. Human weapons operating at power levels that shouldn't fit in vessels that size. Coordinated tactics suggesting communication systems more advanced than anything in use by species centuries older. And most disturbing to many delegates, the humans had hidden this capability perfectly, maintaining the appearance of a juvenile species while building defenses that could shatter a fleet 12 times their number. What else were they hiding? Krelvas seemed to realize he'd lost the Council's reflexive support. This changes nothing, he said, forcing his voice to remain steady. One battle, one engagement where humans employed surprise and deception. The Vakrosian Empire commands thousands of ships. We will... You will what? Charlotte asked quietly. Send more fleets to die against human defenses. How many ships are you willing to lose, Ambassador? How many Vakrosian crews will you sacrifice before you accept that humanity is not weak? The chamber fell silent. Charlotte held Krelvas's glare, and in the depths of his amber eyes, she saw something new. Not rage anymore. Fear. the fear of someone who had pushed expecting surrender and instead had discovered something far more dangerous than anticipated. "This isn't over," Krelvas said finally. "The Vakrosian Empire does not accept defeat from juvenile species." "Then the Vakrosian Empire will learn a painful lesson," Charlotte said. "But know this, Ambassador. Every ship you send against human territory will meet the same fate as your Third Fleet. We are not your subjects. We are not your property. And we will defend ourselves with every weapon, every tactic, and every ounce of will we possess." She left the platform, ignoring the chaos of debate that erupted behind her. In her quarters, the quantum communicator showed Admiral Reeves's face, and she could see the grim satisfaction there. "Phase 1 complete," he said. "They know we can fight, but they don't know what we're really capable of yet." "How long until they try again?" "Intelligence suggests 2 weeks before Krelvas can mobilize additional forces. He's facing political pressure. Losing that many ships in less than an hour will have consequences on Vakros Prime. But he's committed now. Pride won't let him back down." Charlotte nodded. "Then we use the time. Show them more. Make them understand that Proxima wasn't luck." "Already in motion," Reeves said. "Captain Chen has forces positioned at New Bangalore. Captain Okonkwo is ready at Terra Nova. They'll come, Charlotte, and we'll be ready." The transmission ended. Charlotte looked out at Pinnacle Prime's observation gallery, at the ships drifting in their ancient patterns. The galaxy had been peaceful for 3,000 years because younger species accepted their subordinate place in the hierarchy. Humanity had just shattered that assumption. The Council would never see them as weak again. But the test had only begun. Krelvas would come back with greater numbers, convinced that overwhelming force could overcome human deception. He would learn, but the lesson would be written in burning ships and shattered pride. Charlotte thought of the 1,200 civilians murdered on the colony ships, of the colonists at Proxima Threshold who had watched an invasion fleet approach, knowing they might die but refusing to surrender. Of Earth, preparing for this possibility for 50 years, building in secret and hoping for peace while preparing for war. The galaxy had demanded humanity's surrender. Humanity had said no. Now both sides would discover exactly what that meant. The Vakrosian Armada emerged from FTL at the edge of Sol System in a formation designed to inspire terror. 800 warships, the entire reserve fleet of the Vakrosian Empire, arranged in a crescent that stretched across 3 million kilometers. At their center, Krelvas commanded from the superdreadnought Final Judgment, a vessel that had broken planetary defenses and crushed rebellions across a dozen sectors. He had bypassed the human colonies entirely. This would be a decapitation strike, targeting Earth itself. Intelligence reports showed minimal defensive presence in Sol System, a handful of patrol vessels, orbital stations around the outer planets that matched signatures for scientific installations. Humanity had concentrated its hidden forces at the colonies, leaving their homeworld vulnerable. It was, Krelvas thought with grim satisfaction, the mistake that would end this war. "All ships advance to Neptune orbit," he ordered. "Battle formation. I want sensor sweeps every 30 seconds. If the humans have hidden assets here like they did at Proxima, I want them identified before they can deploy." The fleet moved inward, weapons hot, shields at maximum. Krelvas monitored the tactical displays, watching for any anomalies, any signs of camouflaged defenses or vessels masking their signatures. Neptune appeared on visual, a blue-green sphere with orbital installations that registered as research stations and minor manufacturing facilities. Nothing that posed a military threat. The fleet crossed into Neptune's orbital space and still no resistance materialized. Then the research stations opened fire. Not with defensive weapons, but with directed energy arrays that blazed across the void with power outputs that made Krelvas's threat board scream warnings. 4 Vakrosian cruisers evaporated in the first salvo, their shields overloaded before they could even initiate evasive maneuvers. "All ships, return fire!" Krelvas roared. "Target those stations!" The manufacturing facilities bloomed with missile launches. Hundreds of projectiles, each moving with acceleration curves that suggested gravitic propulsion systems the galaxy hadn't thought possible. They didn't fly straight lines, but wove through space in coordinated patterns, adjusting mid-flight to track targeting solutions. And then, the human fleet appeared. Not from behind camouflage, but from micro-jumps that deposited them directly into optimal firing positions throughout the Vakrosian formation. 60 ships materialized simultaneously, and Krelvos understood with sick certainty that they had been waiting just outside normal space, hidden in FTL until the perfect moment to strike. The human vessels were larger than the patrol ships at Proxima. These were capital-class warships, dreadnoughts and carriers that matched Vakrosian tonnage, but moved with impossible agility. They opened fire with coordinated precision that suggested a single tactical intelligence directing every movement. The Battle of Sol had begun, and within the first 3 minutes, the Vakrosians had lost 47 ships. On Pinnacle Prime, Charlotte stood in the observation gallery alongside Curator Silmuth and representatives from 24 species who had gathered to watch the engagement. The holographic display showed real-time feeds from both human and Vakrosian sources, transmitted across the quantum networks that humanity had finally revealed to the galaxy. The Talvine's crystalline structure had gone pale. "Commander Webb, your people are fighting for our survival," Charlotte finished quietly. "This is what we've been preparing for since before we left Earth. This is what we hoped we'd never need." On the display, human ships executed maneuvers that made veteran military observers from multiple species whisper in disbelief. Microjumps that should have required minutes of calculation happened in seconds. Kinetic weapons fired at relativistic speeds struck targets with surgical precision, and most terrifying to those watching, autonomous drone swarms that moved with coordinated intelligence, overwhelming Vakrosian point defenses through sheer tactical sophistication. "They're not fighting like us," a Catharian admiral said softly. "There's no honor in this, no adherence to accepted warfare conventions. They're just destroying." "They're fighting to win," Charlotte said, her voice carrying across the gallery. "Human warfare doctrine doesn't include concepts like honorable defeat. We fight to survive, and we use every advantage we possess. The Vakrosian Empire wanted war. This is what human war looks like." The battle moved inward through the system. At Uranus, the Vakrosian fleet encountered the second defensive perimeter. More disguised installations, more coordinated human vessels appearing from microjump positions. At Saturn, they discovered that the rings weren't just ice and rock, but concealed hundreds of automated weapons platforms that had been placed there over decades of patient preparation. By the time Krelvas reached Jupiter, his fleet had been reduced to 480 ships. The survivors were battered, their formations broken, their command structure collapsing under the weight of casualties and tactical confusion. "This is impossible," Krelvas whispered, watching his tactical board dissolve into chaos. "They're a juvenile species. 50 years of spaceflight. How can they—" His censor officer's voice was raw with shock. "Supreme Governor, new contacts emerging throughout the asteroid belt. Hundreds of them. They're mining facilities, manufacturing stations, and they're all armed." The asteroid belt, humanity's industrial heartland, revealed itself as a defensive kill zone. The installations weren't disguised. They had simply looked like civilian infrastructure because that's what they were. Humanity had built its industrial capacity with dual purpose from the beginning. Every factory and processing station designed to convert to military production or direct combat capability when needed. They opened fire with industrial-scale weapons, mass drivers built to move asteroids repurposed to launch kinetic impactors, mining lasers scaled up to capital ship-killing power. The Vacrosian fleet found itself caught in a crossfire that came from every direction, with no clear targets and no safe vector of advance. Krelvos ordered the fleet to push through. Mars lay ahead, and beyond it, Earth. If they could reach the homeworld, if they could threaten the planetary population directly, surely the humans would have to negotiate. Mars' orbit shattered that hope forever. The red planet was ringed with defensive stations that made Neptune's installations look like patrol posts. Not hidden, but openly visible, massive constructions that must have taken decades to build. They had been there all along, visible to any sensor sweep, dismissed as civilian habitats and scientific installations. And emerging from bases on Phobos, Deimos, and the Martian surface itself came warships that dwarfed anything the Vacrosians had brought. Human dreadnoughts, their hulls bearing the scars of decades of construction and refinement, their weapon systems generations beyond what the galaxy thought possible for such a young species. Admiral Reeves's flagship, the Indomitable, moved to a position directly between the Vacrosian fleet and Earth. Charlotte watched from Pinnacle Prime as Reeves opened a channel that broadcast not just to Krelvos but to every ship in the system, every station, every species with a receiver capable of detecting it. His face appeared on displays across the galaxy, weathered, calm, carrying the weight of absolute conviction. "We are humanity," Reeves said, his voice steady as stone. "We were forged in fire on a world that tried to kill us for 200,000 years. Predators hunted us. Disease ravaged us. Ice ages and droughts and natural disasters that should have ended us. We survived because we learned to adapt, to prepare, to never assume tomorrow would be easier than today." The human fleet moved into formation around Mars, a wall of steel and determination. "We clawed our way to the stars, expecting no mercy and offering no surrender. We sent our first explorers outward knowing they might never return. We built our colonies understanding we might find hostility among the stars. We hoped for friends but prepared for enemies. For 50 years, we maintained diplomatic courtesy while building the capability to defend ourselves against species that had been spacefaring for millennia. For 50 years, we planned for this exact scenario, that someone would see our patience as weakness, our restraint as inability, our youth as vulnerability. Krelvos's fleet had been reduced to 300 ships, all damaged, all struggling to maintain formation. They were trapped between Mars and the asteroid belt, caught in a vice of human firepower with nowhere to retreat. "You chose to be enemies," Reeves continued, and now his voice carried an edge of cold fury. "You murdered 1,200 of our civilians. You demanded we surrender our homes, our colonies, our people to your administration. You brought 800 warships to our homeworld, expecting to find us helpless. This is what that means. This is what attacking humanity costs." The human fleet opened fire. What followed wasn't a battle, but an execution. Earth's defensive platforms, hidden in lunar craters, disguised as orbital habitats, buried in the Lagrange points, all activated simultaneously. The Indomitable and her sister ships unleashed coordinated salvos that had been calculated by tactical AIs to ensure maximum efficiency and minimum wasted fire. The Vacrosian fleet died in 53 minutes. Every ship destroyed or crippled, every formation broken, every chain of command shattered. The humans didn't pursue fleeing vessels. They simply ensured that none remained combat-capable. When the firing stopped, only one Vacrosian ship remained even partially intact. The final judgment. Her weapons arrays destroyed, her engines burned out, her shields collapsed. Krelvos sat in his command chair surrounded by the ruins of his flagship, watching human vessels close in from every direction. Charlotte saw his face on the display transmission, scales gone pale with shock, amber eyes wide with the realization of absolute defeat. He had brought the pride of the Vacrosian Empire to humanity's doorstep, expecting easy victory. He had found apocalypse instead. The human Marines who boarded the final judgment moved with professional efficiency, securing the ship deck by deck. They found Krelvos in his command center, surrounded by dead and dying crew members, his ceremonial armor scorched and cracked from the impacts that had ravaged his ship. He expected execution. Instead, they placed him under arrest and transported him to a conference chamber where a holographic projection waited. Admiral Reeves appeared first, his face showing no triumph, only grim determination. Then Charlotte materialized beside him, her expression carefully neutral. "Supreme Governor Krelvos," Reeves said formally, "by the authority granted to me as Fleet Admiral of Earth's Unified Defense Forces, I am informing you that the Vacrosian Empire's attack on human territory has failed. Your fleet is destroyed. Your military capacity to continue this conflict is eliminated. I am now presenting the terms of humanity's peace settlement." Krelvos said nothing. His scales had gone completely pale, shock rendering him incapable of his usual bluster. "First," Reeves continued, "immediate withdrawal of all Vacrosian military forces from human border regions and neutral zones. Second, full reparations for the 3 colony ships destroyed 6 months ago and the 1,200 civilians murdered aboard them. Third, your personal surrender to stand trial before a neutral tribunal for war crimes, including the unprovoked destruction of civilian vessels and the initiation of aggressive war. Fourth, reduction of Vacrosian military to a defensive fleet only, with size and composition to be monitored by neutral parties approved by the Concordance." The terms were harsh, but not impossible. Krelvos began to understand he might survive this, that the Vacrosian Empire might survive this, if they accepted the conditions. But then, Reeves continued, and something unexpected entered his voice. "Fifth," the Admiral said, "humanity will not occupy Vacrosian worlds, will not demand territorial concessions beyond your withdrawal from disputed regions, will not permit other species to exploit Vacrosian weakness in the aftermath of this conflict. We will actively defend Vacrosian territory against opportunistic aggression by third parties." Krelvos's head lifted, confusion breaking through his shock. "Why?" Charlotte stepped forward in the hologram. "Because we will not become what attacked us. You came to our worlds expecting to dominate us, to take what we built, to reduce our people to subjects under your administration. We refuse to do the same to yours. We fought to defend ourselves, Governor, not to build an empire on your defeat." She looked directly into the camera, knowing the transmission was being broadcast to every species in the Concordance. Humanity seeks not dominance, but security. Not empire, but partnership with species willing to coexist peacefully. We have demonstrated our capacity to defend ourselves. Now we will demonstrate our capacity for restraint. The Vacrosian Empire will face justice for its aggression, but its people will not face annihilation or subjugation. That is not who we are. On Pinnacle Prime, the council chamber had fallen into absolute silence. Species that had watched the Battle of Sol with horror now watched humanity's peace terms with something like awe. The humans had won a complete military victory. They could have demanded anything, taken anything, destroyed anything. Instead, they offered terms that preserved the defeated species while ensuring future security. Council Speaker Mordain rose, his forearms performing the gesture of formal recognition. The Concordance has witnessed the conflict between humanity and the Vacrosian Empire. We have seen unprovoked aggression met with proportional defense. We have seen military superiority tempered with ethical restraint. The Council unanimously accepts humanity's peace terms and recognizes their enforcement authority. The vote was instant and absolute. Every species agreed. In the final judgment's conference chamber, Krelvas looked at Reeves's hologram with eyes that had lost all their predatory certainty. "You spared my flagship," he said hoarsely. "In those final moments, you could have destroyed us." "Why?" Reeves's expression softened slightly. "So you could bear witness. So your people would know the mercy we showed that you didn't show ours. And so the galaxy would understand. We have the strength to destroy, but the wisdom to restrain. We are not your enemies anymore, Governor. We are your judges. And perhaps, if your people choose differently, we could become your partners." Krelvas was remanded to a neutral tribunal that included human, Talveen, and Concordance representatives. The trial would be fair, Charlotte ensured that. Justice, not vengeance. Across the Vacrosian Empire, the civilian population received humanitarian aid from Earth within weeks. Medical supplies, food shipments for worlds disrupted by the military mobilization, engineering support for infrastructure damaged in the fleet's hasty departure. The galaxy watched as humanity demonstrated the difference between power and cruelty. 3 months later, Charlotte stood in the Concordance chamber, not in the observation tier, but in the inner circle, at a seat newly created for humanity. The emergency restructuring had elevated Earth from observer to full voting member, and she had been elected to the newly formed Security Council alongside Curator Silmith and representatives from 5 other species. "The Coalition for Mutual Security is now operational," Charlotte announced to the assembled delegates. 12 species have committed vessels to the unified peacekeeping fleet. These ships will train under human tactical doctrine, operate under joint command, and serve as rapid response against aggression by any party. The age of stronger species dominating weaker ones is over. The Concordance now has the capacity to enforce its own peace. Admiral Reeves appeared via hologram beside her. The unified fleet will be headquartered at Pinnacle Prime, but maintain rapid deployment bases in 4 sectors. Any species facing territorial aggression can request intervention. The fleet answers to the Security Council, not to any single species. This is the galaxy's defense force, not humanity's. 7 species that had territorial disputes with the Vacrosian Empire had already requested human mediation. Charlotte had spent weeks negotiating agreements that satisfied all parties, drawing on lessons learned from Earth's long history of peace treaties and territorial settlements. The humans weren't taking sides. They were ensuring fair outcomes. And in the most surprising development, Vacros Prime's new civilian government, elected after the military dictatorship dissolved in the wake of the Sol defeat, had requested admission to the Coalition for Mutual Security. Charlotte had sponsored them personally over the objections of species seeking revenge for old Vacrosian aggression. "They made mistakes," she had told the council. "They paid for those mistakes. Now they're choosing a different path. We either believe species can change, or we condemn them to repeat history." The request had been approved by narrow margin. Curator Silmith approached Charlotte after the session, her crystalline structure glowing with satisfaction. "You have transformed the galaxy in 3 months, Commander. Some species required 3,000 years to achieve less. We had help, Charlotte said, nodding toward the Talveen delegate. Your people stood with us when no one else would. We won't forget that. And the galaxy will not forget what humanity demonstrated, Silmith replied. Strength without cruelty, victory without vengeance, justice without subjugation. These are not the actions of a juvenile species, Charlotte. These are the actions of a species that has truly earned its place among the stars. Charlotte looked around the chamber at the species who had dismissed humanity as primitive, who had watched the Vacrosian ultimatum with indifference, who had expected either human capitulation or human destruction. They looked at her differently now, with respect, with calculation, with the understanding that humanity was neither weak nor cruel, neither victim nor aggressor, but something the galaxy hadn't seen before, a species that understood power and chose restraint. The trial of Krelvas would conclude in 3 more weeks. Charlotte would attend, representing humanity but also ensuring the proceedings remained fair. The Vacrosian people deserved justice, not revenge theater. And when it ended, when Krelvas faced the consequences of his choices, the galaxy would witness humanity's commitment to law over vengeance. She returned to her quarters that evening and opened the quantum channel to Earth. Reeves's face appeared, and she could see the weight of the last 3 months had aged him. It's done, she said simply. The Concordance is restructured. The coalition is operational. 12 species have joined, including the Vacrosians. We're no longer the youngest species at the table, Admiral. We're architects of a new galactic order. Reeves smiled, exhaustion evident, but satisfaction clear. 50 years ago, we reached for the stars hoping we'd find friends. We prepared for enemies but never stopped hoping. I think we've found both, Charlotte, and we've shown them who we are. Who are we? Charlotte asked softly. Survivors, Reeves said. Defenders. Builders. Humanity. And that's enough. The transmission ended. Charlotte looked out at the stars beyond Pinnacle Prime, at the vast galaxy that had underestimated Earth, and felt something she hadn't allowed herself to feel in months. Hope. The Council had demanded Earth's surrender. Earth had sent back 2 words, and those 2 words had changed the galaxy forever.